Thank you, good evening, and welcome to this meeting of the Audit and Standards Committee. I will move straight to agenda item 1, announcements. To advise that this fire drill is not expected, so if the alarm does sound, please evacuate the building quickly and calmly. Use the stairs and not the lifts. Once outside, please gather outside what is now the Virgin Money building opposite, formerly the Yorkshire Bank. Exit by the doors which you entered the room or by the fire exit, which are clearly indicated by the standard green fire exit sign. If you do need any assistance in evacuating the building, please make yourself known to a member of staff at the time. In addition, this is to inform obviously all members that this meeting is being live streamed and recorded for future publication on the Council's website. And if I can ask that all members and everybody in attendance, please turn their phone off or to silent for the duration of the meeting. In addition, can I also welcome and thank our external guests this evening. We've got Grant Patterson from Grant Thornton at present, and I understand that we should be joined by, hopefully shortly, by his colleague Will Guest. Into item 1. On to item 2, apologies.
Yes, Chair, we have apologies from Councillor Markham and Mr Goriola. And Councillor Hammersley is a substitute for Councillor Markham.
Thank you very much for that. Next part is item 3, which is the minutes. To approve the minutes of the extraordinary meeting held on the 22nd of June 2021. Is there any proposer for those? Thank you, Councillor Beetham. And seconder? Councillor Downs, thank you very much. Any comments on this item? No. Any dissent? No, in which case they are agreed. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Number 4, declaration of interest. To receive any declarations of disclosable pecuniary or other interests in accordance with the Code of Conduct. Are there any interests other than those printed in the agenda at page 12? No. Thank you very much. Agenda item 5, I have no members of the public having indicated in advance they wish to attend and speak, and looking up there are no members of the public in the gallery either, so obviously that is complete. Agenda item 6 is the external audit plan, a report from the auditors presented by the representative Grant Thornton, Grant Patterson. Thank you.
Chair, can you hear me or do I need to get closer to the mic? Get closer. Oh, stand underneath it then. Shall I sit here rather than stand? It would look a bit odd. Okay, thank you, Chair. As I say, you've got 2 papers on the agenda from us today. As I was hoping that Will Guest would be here. I think members who were on the Audit Standards Committee already know Will. He was the in-charge auditor, but he's been promoted to manager. So he will be taking over the managing of the audit going forward. But in Will's absence, I will speak to the plan. And the other change of staff is, in terms of that, as Will's been promoted, Alison Thomas is the new in-charge auditor, assistant manager for the audit for this year. So those are sort of 3 names you'll probably come across most regularly. So if I'm speaking to the addendum pack that's in front of you, I think in terms of the audit plan overall on page 4, I suppose just the scene setting. I'm clearly members aware that we're still in the hopefully coming out of a pandemic now, depending on how the summer pans out. But the council will still be operating in that environment in terms of its financials and in terms of its service delivery over the last year and going in forward in 21-22. Therefore, we're factoring that into sort of risks for our audit. In terms of that, I think the main one for us, and it's not a significant risk, is you will have got a lot more grants in from government to help support the council through the pandemic. In terms of the process, that will be business as usual for you, but the volume this year will be significantly higher. Therefore, from our perspective, an audit, as audit says there will be an increased risk around that. And also, when you'll see this coming through to value for money, clearly financial sustainability of the council is one of the areas we'll be looking at, but you wouldn't be alone in that in overall terms. Again, another theme coming through is the Financial Reporting Council, I suppose, as our regulator, as auditor, is continuing to drive, I suppose, its view of audit quality and challenge that was acquired by auditors. So that is a theme coming through in the audit plan. And again, that's not just on our firm, that's going to be consistent across the sector as a whole. So it's overall that sort of background about where we are on the audit. So if I turn over the page in terms of introductions and headlines, the actual audit plan overall, though, is very similar to what to members who would have been on the committee in the past would have seen. In terms of that, whilst we've been through a pandemic, I suppose from our perspective, the significant risks still remain the same in terms of what we would call management override of controls. That's the ability to manipulate the accounts. That's a presumed significant risk as auditors. I can't rebut that. I have to do some work around that. But again, we've looked at the control processes in place at the council. You have internal audit, you have your own governance arrangements. We think, again, the conclusion is that if people are going to manipulate the accounts, that will be through journals, through moving money around within the accounts and trying to conceal it. So we'll focus our response to that risk around work on journals. And then in terms of, I suppose, on the balance sheet, the two biggest numbers in the balance sheet are going to be your property, plant and equipment, mainly other land and buildings and council dwellings, and your net pension liability. So both of those are valuations in many senses. They're involved in estimates, they're involved in the use of experts. They're therefore complex, and it doesn't need too much of a small percentage change to make a big change in the number. Therefore, from an audit perspective, they continue to be areas of focus. I know that members might feed back to us that actually the way you manage your property, plant and equipment isn't the same as you might do in the commercial world, but our regulator still says we have to look at the accounting standards as they currently are and audit against those. So hence it is an area of focus for us, although I do appreciate that you manage your estate in a different way than the commercial side would, and you're not taking out loans or anything like that against your estate that the commercial sector might be doing. Therefore the valuation is different, but you do need to manage it appropriately. So those would be the significant risks that we'll be looking at as part of the audit plan. In terms of materiality, a slight increase this year based upon expenditure. We've taken that to the surplus of provision on the development of service provision level rather than the cost of services level, so it's a slightly different calculation. But again, it's comparable to last year based upon the expenditure. We will review that once we've got the draft financial statements in front of us and report back to you if we change that. In terms of value for money, I'll come on to that in a bit more detail. If I just turn you onto our page 6, your page 7. We're currently in conversations with the finance team, as we were last year, around NABSEL, around whether it has turnover has grown, I suppose, sufficiently that it might require group accounts. We've put it in here at the moment as potentially requiring group accounts. We haven't started that audit process yet. If we do have to undertake work, we would, my view would be we'd look at specific classes of transactions. In the past, we've been able to get into the ledger and look at the income and expenditure directly and audit it directly. So we would look to do that approach again, although I think the registered address has now moved out of the council down to Weddington, I believe. So I'm not quite sure exactly where but so we would look at that. But again, we're in conversation with finance about whether it's got to be sufficient for material to be in your account. So in other words, would it influence at a line level? So that may well change in the audit plan. It may well be that we don't have to do any work there going forward. The following pages, really, I won't talk to any more detail around those risks. I think probably on page 8 of your pack, just to say that one of the significant risks we have to look at is fraud in revenue recognition. Given the nature of the revenue streams, we've rebutted for most of that, and we're just going through a process of looking at the COVID grant process, so I'm hopeful that I'll be able to rebut that as well, so we won't have to do any specific work there. We also, you'll hear probably more reference this year to something called Practice Note 10, which is the public sector interpretation of auditing standards. So we look at expenditure as well, because the actual auditing standards only look at income because they're focused on the commercial side. But Practice Note 10 says actually in the public sector people are interested in how you spend the money, not necessarily how you raise it, because it's how well are you spending their taxes. So we've looked at that again, and I don't see that there's a fraud risk in expenditure, so we've rebutted that, but we will be undertaking work on those areas. We're not going to ignore them, but we won't undertake additional audit procedures. I've mentioned the other significant risks, as part of that. On page 10 of your pack, just really highlighting this year one of the big changes for us is ISA 540, which is around estimates, and we have to undertake additional procedures in relation to that, and actually be even more challenging to your finance team than maybe we'd have in the past around the evidence supporting some of those estimates and disclosures, and that actually, when I come on to the next paper, covers that. So we've highlighted there the ones we were focusing on, which I've already looked at: valuation of buildings, depreciation is number one, year-end accruals, credit loss allowances for loans, and valuation of the defined pension scheme. On page 13 is just summarising the other matters for which we're responsible, and looking at going concern and public rights. Page 14 gives more detail on materiality. And page 15 begins to sort of see what the new value for money arrangements are like. So 2021 is the first year of the new Code of Audit Practice as laid down by the National Audit Office, and that brings in a new approach to value for money for this year, in terms of, whereas in the past we focused on exceptions, on looking at risk that might be a risk, we've now got to give a commentary across the council as a whole. We will look at focus areas, and on the following page, the focus area that we still continue to look at for the council's specific is in respect of financial sustainability, and that's probably, you'll see that a fairly generic risk, I think, across a lot of our local government clients. That's not specific to Nuneaton, and that just reflects the uncertain times we're in. You've been working, as most local government is, on annual settlements, and I think the hope is that hopefully we'll get to a 3-year settlement either this year or in the near future that will enable you to plan with a bit more certainty. But we're waiting to see the government announcements on that. So that's the focus area for us, but we will be reporting back to you against financial governance, economy efficiency effectiveness, and financial sustainability as the 3 main areas. The one big change, or not big change, but I do need to bring to highlight your attention, is the audit fees for this year. Picking up on that theme of greater challenge and expectations for Financial Reporting Council, we are proposing what is a significant increase in the audit fee. It is consistent, though, with the sector, and MHCLG has provided additional funding to the government sector, that picking up on the Redmond report, that is to support additional audit, scrutiny and challenge. And basically, I think MHCLG is looking about, it's about £15 million, which I think is about 60% or something like that. And our fee increase is not matched to that, but we've come up with this number, looking at the risk we had to undertake, and it does align to that. We're therefore proposing on the fee, on the PSAA scale fee, an increase to just over £64,000, and that's a 60% increase on the scale fee. It's clearly a slightly smaller increase on the fee for last year. That's consistent across our client base. It is subject to PSAA approval. Therefore, we're not billing you this amount yet. We're actually billing you on the scale fee. So until once PSAA have seen all of the firm's proposals, then they will form a view on whether they are reasonable and appropriate. But I'm informing you now because I think in the past people have said, can you tell us up front what you think the fee is going to be rather than retrospectively. And then just finally, on a reminder, is just the other services we do provide for you. We audit your housing benefit claim, your certification of pooling claim, and your 2 other claims we do for you as part of your audit. The audit approach and audit fees are laid down there. And I was going to stop there on the plan and take questions.
Thank you very much. In order to, obviously then to do this, the proposed list of recommendation to note the report, I move that. Is there a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Downs. Any member wish to speak? Councillor Condacor.
Thank you very much, Chair. One bit of admin. This is a normal meeting, not an extraordinary meeting that says on the front of the agenda. Coming to the report itself, we've had a few councils have financial difficulties this year. I think the most notable is Slough, but it's been around the country. And these things sometimes come expected. So I suspect the extra fees and stuff you're charging is to actually do deeper delves and actually give earlier warnings of these sort of problems. And it would be useful to know sort of your feelings on how secure you are in terms of the financial study you're doing. Yeah, are we actually going through the day-to-day finances effectively to see that we aren't depending too much on NAB cell income or civic halls and things? Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Grant.
Yes, so thank you, Councillor. That is a good reminder. The big chunk of the fee increase this year is related to value for money. So yes, we will be doing, I suppose, a more in-depth dive into the areas around value for money. So that does pick up a big chunk of the fee increase, alongside actually the estimates work as well, which in many ways does feed into that financial sustainability about understanding what your challenges are. How confident am I? We've really only just probably started our work in terms of looking, well, we've done particularly in the past in terms of where Nuneaton is. I think if we did our risk assessment, I don't have any immediate concerns about where the council is right now, but I'm not going to stand back and say it's not challenging. I think you're looking at, you're probably at your, close to your minimum what you want on your general fund reserve level. So it's a really careful management is required now. And I know the new administration as well is looking about how it wants to prioritise. So I know you're still going through that process of looking to do what you wish to do in the new administration. So I don't have any immediate concerns, but yes, we will be looking at it in more detail and going through that with the finance team. And the whole part of this is to give you an independent view on, I suppose, the numbers that you're being presented with. But I don't have any immediate concerns around the sort of cash flow of the council and its ability to pay for services. As I say, I think the bigger challenge is probably how do you plan ahead for the medium term beyond sort of 1 year at the moment. And that's part down to the government, part down to yourselves. But it is that uncertainty around the funding regime and how the public are going to react to coming back out of the pandemic around, picking up, I think, on the council's point of view, around fees and charges, around will you be seeing car park levels get back to where they were? Will people go back to the local gyms, everyone active as much as they were? I don't know that you're looking to do free car parking to try and encourage economic growth within the town centres. How will that pan out? I don't know. So there are some uncertainties on there. So we are focusing on that, and we'll come back in September, report back on that initially, and then I think you'll get a more detailed report from us on the VFM around about November.
Thank you for that one. Any other member at this stage? No. Well, I think given car parking obviously has been mentioned, I think it's a really great initiative that's come forward, that 3 hours for £1 that's currently under consultation that hopefully will be going on from the 1st of August, plus free parking in the run-up to Christmas. We've seen fees go up in the past and income come down. So, let's see and hope that we are proved correct by the Laffer curve effect that lower money is more people, is more money overall coming in. So, thank you on that one. It's been proposed and seconded, therefore, to note the comments of the external audit plan, as item 6. Is there any dissent? No, that therefore has been approved for noting. Thank you. Item then number 7, informing the risk or the audit risk assessment, and I believe that's you again, Grant.
Me again, yes.
Thank you.
I won't take as much of your time this time. Primarily, this is a document of communication between ourselves as auditors and we use as a management, but that will be the finance team, MDs, etc., executive directors. It's a series of questions that we ask, and we've got responses. This paper records management responses. We've reviewed them as your auditors as management responses, and we're comfortable with them. Primarily, what we're doing here is asking you as audit committee to confirm that they are consistent with your knowledge and understanding of the council, or is there anything you wish to bring to our attention? And probably just at the back of this report, in the appendix, there's evidence around the estimates, and part of that is the arrangements that you've already got in place to make sure that those estimates are true and fairly presented in your accounts. So I'm not really going to say any more to that. I don't think I need to say specifically to any parts of it. It's a question of, do you recognise the council? Are you happy to sign? To say yes, that's what we believe is in place. And if there's any questions, I'll do my best to answer them, or I might have to defer to Craig as head of financial services if need be.
Thank you very much. Again, we've got no public speakers tonight. So in order to move for debate, I move that the report be noted. Is there a seconder? Councillor Kenner, thank you very much. Any member wish to speak on this item? No? Excellent. Well, it has been proposed and seconded, therefore, to note the report. Is there any dissent? No, therefore that is carried. Can I just say thank you to Grant for coming along? Obviously that's the end of your items. You are welcome to stay, or you're also free to leave. So not a problem. You're more than welcome. So thank you very much again, Grant, for that. Agenda item 8, the Treasury Management Monitoring Q4 2020-21. Craig, thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. This is a standard report that I present to the committee, but as we've got quite a few new members of this committee, I'll go into a bit more detail than I have done previously. Key points that I want to bring out then are obviously the economic summary we've got at point 3 of the report. Bank rate maintained at 0.1%, which is a new historic low. Previously we've been saying the 0.25 was the historic low. We can break records and do it even lower. But CPI inflation is now starting to increase, so the Monetary Policy Committee and the Bank of England are being mindful of keeping a close eye on that. If it does start creeping away, then we will see interest rates increasing earlier than we originally anticipated. And that is reflected in the table at 4.1. It's got two parts, where the lower part shows what the interest rate forecast was in March and what it is in May. And you can see that now the view is that potentially we could start seeing an increase, not until 2022-23 though. So for the medium term, we are expecting interest rates to be maintained at this level, and the Bank of England are seeing that this current shock in inflation CPI is just a minor blip, and it will balance itself out. But it is something we will keep a close eye on, and in particularly with what the forecast of borrowing rates are, because we are in a quite large under-borrowed position. Moving over to 5.4, a standard table we put in, and that is a snapshot position of where our debt and investment portfolio was sitting at the 31st of March for the 2 financial years. So like I say, it is just a camera snapshot, and you can see that our investments did drop from 30 million to 27 million, which was expected. And you can see that the actual return we were getting at that snapshot point in time dropped from 1.16 to 0.56. Even though bank rate hadn't changed, obviously the maturing investments that we had got placed at higher rates, which you can see at the top, we did have approximately 7 million invested at 31st of March 2020 at over 1%, and another 9 million invested at 1%. They've all matured. So now we're only able to invest at much, much lower rates, hence the lower return now. The net debt position is dropped from 47 million to 45.5 million, and that's, our investments have dropped 3 million, but our debt has also dropped as well. We've had a number of natural maturities on our debt portfolio. We've not looked to replace them because of the actual cost of borrowing at the moment compared to investment rates, and we've actually had quite a lot of capital slippage where we were looking to actually take on new debt, so we've not taken any new debt at all in the financial year. 5.5 over the page just shows the actual investment portfolio, so you can actually see the full detail, and this committee does get a full detailed breakdown of our investment portfolio and movements. Cabinet will be receiving an outturn report tomorrow, but that's more at summary level. Moving over to 5.19, this table shows the average balances and returns for the year. So this is, compared to the start and the end of the year, the movement. So we've actually had an average investment balance of 39 million compared to 41 million the year before, and again you can see that returns have dropped as expected. But you should also be able to see that when you look at the average bank rate for 2019-20 compared to 2020-21, that our performance has been well ahead of benchmark. So if you look at bank rate, 3-month LIBOR and 6-month LIBOR, where we do pitch our investment balances, we're way ahead of benchmark, which is good news. And you can see that the borrowing, the average has dropped from 78.5 to 74 mil. So it's quite a significant drop there. This, again, moving over to the page and talk about the property fund in a little bit of detail. We have got £2 million invested in the CCLA property fund, which is just restricted to local authorities. And we did see a blip during 2019-20 and the first quarter of 2021 due to Brexit uncertainty and the onset of the COVID-19 outbreak, which severely impacted on the markets, the capital value of those property investments. We have seen a rebound in those values, which is good news. So the capital losses have not been as severe for the financial year as we originally may have expected. And you can see that the actual quarterly yield against the amount deposited has been quite strong. It has been volatile, as there have been some people either refusing to pay their rents or seeking to take deferral of their rent payments to the property fund. But it has been a very strong market, so we got 4% yield against our £2 million investment. And when you were to compare that with what potentially we could get by investing £2 million in a fixed term deposit, we would get nowhere near that. We'd be looking at less than 1%. At the moment, we have the luxury of a statutory override because there was a change in financial regulations a few years ago where movements in capital value should have been charged to the general fund balances. And the table at 529 shows what would have happened if that statutory override was not in place. So we've had dividends of £80,000, but we actually had capital losses over the year of £13,000. So our net return would have been 67, giving us a net yield of 3.34%. We have got the luxury at the moment of this statutory override for another 2 or 3 years now, which means that we can actually reverse those capital losses out. So we're just seeing the net yield of £80,000 in there in the 4%. But I think it's worth, keep reflecting this to members as to what the risk is, because if the statutory override does drop out and doesn't get extended, we will start seeing movements in capital value chargeable to general fund balances. I would like to say though that we have got an earmarked reserve set aside to mitigate for any losses in the future, so we have been cautious of this and actually got reserve set aside to actually weather any storm if we do need to, so try and smooth any impact when that statutory override runs out. 5.31 and 5.32 show the detail movement in our portfolio across the final quarter. And you can see that we've done quite a lot of business with Coventry Building Society in the final quarter, and that is really because they were the only player in the market that wanted to take any short-term cash. And they were offering more return than we've just put it in with the money market funds. For members concerned, we do have limits, financial limits with each institution, so we don't put all our investments in one place. We do spread it across a portfolio, just so we don't put it all in money market funds or all with Coventry Building Society or all with Lloyds. We do spread it across a number of institutions to mitigate any risk. 5.33, and I've alluded to it, this goes into our under-borrowed position. And just to try and briefly explain that, our capital financing requirement is a calculation from our balance sheet which indicates what level of debt we should hold in relation to capital expenditure that's not yet been funded by our own resources. So that's standing at 94 million. But at the end of the year, our actual debt was 73 million. So we are under borrowed by 21 million. Sounds like a lot, but if you put it into context, if I was to externalise all that debt and take that under borrowed position to nil, I would be borrowing at something like 2%, if you looked at the earlier charts. But what would I be doing with that cash? I would be putting it out in the investment markets and getting 0.05%. So that would be what's classed as a cost of carry. It would cost the council money. So while it's feasible and we actually do a balance sheet forecast looking forward, if it's affordable and the interest rate forecast doesn't put us in too much of a risky situation where we're going to be a forced borrower in the future at high rates, it's a position I will look to maintain. 534 is a table I only put in at the end of the financial year because it's almost impossible to do during the year. And it's because we actually are able to analyse our balance sheet and identify where our investment resources are made up from. So it's made up from general fund balances, HRA balances, our earmarked reserves, major repairs reserve, which is ring fence for capital HRA, receipts, grants contributions, and a bit of working capital. So you can see the actual cash we got available to invest was £49 million. But we were actually under borrowed by 21, so we were using some of those resources temporarily to save the council money, and it's doable. So our actual investments dropped to 27. It is something we, as I say, we do keep an eye on. We don't want to put ourselves into a forced borrowing position when interest rates are at their highest. So it is something that we are cautious about. 537 table shows our revenue position, and it's primarily showing that general fund and HRA were underspent, and that was driven by debt savings because we, as I said, again increased the under-borrow position, so we weren't incurring debt costs, and we deferred taking any replacement debt for any debt that did mature during the year. So we managed to bank those savings and help the pressures that both the general fund and the HRA were facing due to COVID. Section 6 gives you the summary of the prudential and treasury indicators that this committee monitor. There's no areas of concern there, all were within parameters that were approved. And finally, the charts at Appendix A are there just to show how we manage the risk. So the first one, chart 1, is our investment maturity profile. So when are our investments maturing? So have I got enough cash in the short term to service our expenditure? Chart 2, again, just shows the same analysis, but over each quarter, so you can see how it's changed over the last financial year. And I've got no concerns with the maturity profile. And chart 3 just shows where we're actually splitting our investment balances. So how much is it in UK building societies, UK banks, money market funds, and money market funds are AAA rated, highest quality rating available, and they are liquid. And we've got the property fund as well. And finally, the Appendix B is the debt maturity profile. Hopefully a detailed enough but whistle-stop tour for the committee, and hopefully it was informative enough for the new members, but I'm happy to take questions, and the recommendation is purely that the committee note this report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Craig. If I could just make one comment on the charts, particularly on chart 1, 2 and 3. I know obviously when we print it's in black and white, but if we could have those in colour on the online version would be helpful. I know on the screen it's even less clear than the printed version in front of us, so that would just be a slight housekeeping if that would be possible for future for us. I know that would, we get black and white printing and that's absolutely right, but certainly in the online versions that would certainly be more helpful because some of those top colours the lighter colours do fade a little bit on these pixel screens. So that's just, thank you very much on that one. So obviously this is a report recommendation for noting. In order to move debate, I'm happy to move that we note the report. Is there a seconder? Councillor Beetham, thank you. Any member wish to speak on agenda item 8? Councillor Tromans.
Thank you, Chair. Just a very quick question. 5.27, I think for the benefit of newer members and everyone at home, if you can just give us a little bit more detail about the statutory override, and can you be specific about the amount of reserves you've got set aside? Thank you.
Thank you. Craig?
Thank you very much. Yes, the statutory override, as I've said, any changes in the capital value of the property fund. So if the property fund is essentially us invested £2 million along with a number of other authorities. It's over £1 billion that has been invested in this fund. The property fund managers go out and actually buy assets. Some shops, industrial units, some sheds, those kind of things. A whole range of different assets, so they are spreading that risk again like we do with our normal investments. They will seek to get a return from rents on those properties, which is the yield that we're getting. But inevitably with bricks and mortar there will be changes in capital value, and there's a quarterly assessment done by valuers of the property fund that will look at that. At the moment, as I say, the statutory override means that any changes in the capital value of those assets, so how much they are worth if they were to be sold at arm's length, doesn't hit our reserves. So we can actually reverse out. So for the last financial year there was £13,000 losses against our £2 million investment. Yeah, the previous financial year it was £70,000 losses. Whereas previously we'd seen 26,000 gain, 45,000 gain, and the table at 523 just shows how much those capital values do fluctuate. Because there was lobbying by a large number of councils and by SIPFA to MHCLG, because there was far too much of a risk to councils to say, hold on, you'd encourage us to actually diversify our investment portfolio. They allowed for a statutory override to be put in place temporarily to allow for councils to reposition their portfolio if they did want to. We don't really want to look at, reposition our portfolio. It's a small proportion of our investment balances, and over the long term, capital values do tend to increase. There will be some blips in the water. We will see some fluctuations where some years we may see drops, and we have weathered that storm. We've come out the other side. Once that statutory override comes out, if it doesn't get extended, because I'm sure there will be lobbying by authorities again, then any changes will be chargeable. We have identified, we did have what's called a local authority mortgage scheme reserve, and we've got about £80,000 sitting in that at the moment. At the moment it is being ring-fenced for what was the old LAMS scheme, and it was to indemnify Lloyds Bank, who issued mortgages under the LAMS project, that if there were any defaults we would need to indemnify Lloyds for those losses. At the moment there are no indemnities in place. We've not been called for that, we're just holding it there, and those indemnities are due to run out next year. So we're going to ring fence that reserve for this particular purpose, just to weather any blips if we do see any losses.
Is it on that matter, Councillor Tromans? Councillor Tromans.
Thank you, Chair. So, in a nutshell, in layman's terms, the value of property being volatile, going up and down, we shouldn't have to take the hits when it goes down and take profit when it goes up, because we're just invested in it to get a return off the rents. And that's why the government gave this exemption to local authorities like us to not recognise it. Great stuff. But you said you'd actually got a reserve put by for it. We haven't yet, it sounds like. It sounds like you're going to recycle the local authority mortgage scheme reserve that was put aside for that purpose. My understanding of that is that when those indemnities run out, yes, you might be right at the end of next year, but if a loss was realised in that period, the bank does have a fair while afterwards to come back to us if they can't recover it to claim on our indemnity. I'm not sure they have to give us notice of stuff that's at risk. So it might be that that money's not safe to really recycle for a couple more years, or 3, maybe even more.
Thank you for that, Councillor. Just before you come back on that, Craig, there were 2 terms, just for the benefit of any public watching, used 2 acronyms in that. We used them a couple of times, SIPFA and MHCLG. Would you just be able to explain for particularly those at home what those 2 acronyms are as well? I think it's just quite important, if possible, please. And obviously, Councillor Tromans' follow-ups. Thank you.
Certainly, thank you, Chair. SIPFA is the Chartered Institute of Public Finance and Accounting, and that's the body that local authorities are bound to comply with in production of their accounts and accounting regulations. The SIPFA interprets the International Financial Reporting Standards on a local authority basis, and MHCLG is the Ministry for Housing and Communities and Local Government, part of central government body. Regarding the LAMS, the Local Authority Mortgage Scheme Reserve, the indemnity is time limited, and we are coming to the expiry of that, because the LAMS, I think it was for a 5-year period from when the mortgages were actually issued by Lloyds, so that was the agreement, so that is expiring, and at the moment there are no mortgages that are in arrears that we approved, so that's why we consider it to be a low risk, but we're holding it there because yes, the risk is still there, but at the moment there are no arrears on those, which is why we're happy to say that it should be there. We'll be able to recycle it or redefine it as an earmark reserve to satisfy this.
Thank you very much. Councillor Condacor.
Thank you very much, Chair. On that 5-year override, when it comes to the end, do you actually book the change of value if it's not extended? So, you gain 13, lose 17, it's sort of noise. But at the end of that period, do we actually book an overall loss? Because obviously that would make a big hit in one year. And secondly, on the large amounts of deposits with the Coventry Building Society, some of us older people remember Northern Rock and how keen that was on growing and etc. And so there is a worry if we have 18 million all in the same building society at a time when house prices have gone up 10%, they could next year go down 10%. So do we then need extra reassurance or extra diversity in which building society we put 18 million in? Because say Coventry Building Society seems a really sound organisation, but if you only invest in housing, you can be taken out by the whole market going up or down. So I think there are 2 points I wanted to raise, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Craig?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor. In answer to your first thing, yes. If that statutory override does expire and doesn't get extended, then any gains or losses that have been accumulated we've actually got a reserve sitting on the balance sheet at the moment to hold those in an unusable reserve, they will become chargeable to the general fund. Hence the reason why we want to make sure we've actually got a reserve there to actually weather that storm, and so we don't cause a shock to general fund balances and council taxpayers. In answer to your Coventry Building Society, we are limited to, under our strategy, £8 million at any one point in time to be invested in that institution. If you were to look at the table at 5.5, there is only £4 million at the end of the year invested in Coventry Building Society. There was a number of deposits placed with them during the final quarter, but if you were to look, some of them are 1 week, some of them 2 weeks. So at any one point in time, we were never in excess of that £8 million limit that we have got set under the policy.
So just for clarity there, Craig, looking at 5.31, although there is 18 million in total that have been invested, those were from 4th of Jan this year through to 8th of March this year, and those terms, one of them was 3 months, one was 1 month. By and large, after that, they're 2 week and 1 week deposits. So as you say, so at any one point there would not have been an excess of money there, but it was a short-term deposit. Is that correct?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we didn't breach any deposit limits with any institution, and it was primarily just to manage our cash flows, because if we'd left it in with our current account, our Lloyds Bank, we would have been breaching limits in Lloyds Bank potentially. And if we were to place it in with a money market fund, we'd have had a return of absolutely 0 or 0.01%. So under our strategy, it's a case of security, liquidity, yield. Security was there because Coventry was deemed to be a credit-worthy counterparty. Liquidity, as you can see, we've got 2 weeks, 1 week investment, so we wanted it back in a short period. And the yield was far better than we'd have placed it with a money market fund. So we complied with the strategy, and that security, liquidity, yield is a SIP for Treasury policy anyway. Thank you.
Councillor Condacor.
Sorry, Chair. On a different matter, when do we need to start increasing our borrowing for the investments in like the Abbey Street Hotel? Because obviously you talk about being under Borough, but if we need to transition then to actually start doing some borrowing, is there a sort of forecast of when we start to ramp? Thank you, Chair.
Craig.
Thank you very much. We haven't got a full detailed cash flow. At the moment it's high level, pretty much on a quarterly basis, but we are aiming to probably take some debt in this financial year. So we're keeping an eye on when is the best time to do it. What I don't want to do is take borrowing in advance of need. I will wait until the point in time where the expenditure is pretty much committed and is going out the door before I do take debt. If I borrow in advance of need, I'm incurring a cost of carry and at risk then of being over borrowed if that expenditure has not occurred.
Thank you. Any other member with any questions, comments on this point at this time? Councillor Downs.
Oh, there you go. Thank you, Chair. Quick one for you. As a private business owner and a well-known business network individual, I go to an awful lot of business networks, and you get your independent financial advisors, people like that there, quoting actual figures of 6 and 7% returns per year. That to me, I've got to say it, blows these figures out of the water. Is there a reason why the council can't look into using some of these people to get a better return for our investments? Thank you.
Craig.
Thank you very much. The policy, our investment strategy and our investment counterparty list is approved by council each year, and as I said, we've got this SIP for code that we comply with security, liquidity and yield. To get returns of 6%, you've got to substantially increase risk of capital losses, of not getting your money back at all, or significantly losing a large amount of capital value. As we're investing, public money, it's not something that we would consider at all. So it is looking after that cash. Security is the primary objective, and making sure that we get that principal amount returned to our bank account so we can utilise it for what it was intended for. So we wouldn't be looking at the private sector certainly for 6% returns. We do have in our strategy the capability to invest in corporate bonds but they do need to be of a sufficient credit rating for us to do it. And again, we wouldn't be getting 6% returns. You might get a few ticks above, but corporate bonds do tend to be a bit more volatile in their credit ratings than banks and building societies.
Thank you for that and the question and answer. Any further questions from members? No. As you'll have heard, the start of the evening, Mr. Sonola can't be with us, and it's in relation to health matters. As a result, he's actually asked for a couple of, sent in advance to me, a couple of questions, clarifications that he would like to ask on this item. Given the circumstances, I will allow them, and I will read those on his behalf now. There are three, and I'll take them in turn. At 5.4, page 17, he states, our net debt was reduced by £1,420 as at 31st of March. Could this be attributed to the fact that we're able to switch most of our fixed rate investments to variable rate deposits, which ultimately reduced our total borrowing, and hence the reduction of the total net debt? That's his first question there. Craig, anything on that one?
The net debt position at 5.4, the movement of 1.5 million is literally just the net position of our investments and our debt. So we were effectively got a net borrowing position of 45.5 mil compared to 47 mil the previous year. Our investment balances have dropped, but also our debt levels have dropped because, as I say, we've repaid debt, we've not taken any new debt on, and it is purely a snapshot position at that 31st of March point in time. Some of it will be relating to working capital, and there was that table I put earlier on. I think it was at 5 points. Move forwards to that one. 5.34, which just shows our actual investment balances. So, yeah, theoretically our investment balances could have been a lot higher, but because we've increased our underborrowed position, but you can see that our working capital position has changed as well. So there's no simple explanation as to the movement in 1.5 million, but it is useful to see that our net debt position has reduced. But we've also received a substantial number of government grants relating to COVID, which were ARG as an example, which was sitting in our bank account at the end of the financial year, so unutilised at that point in time. So it is a bit of a moving minefield.
Thank you for that one. Second question is in relation to 5.19 on page 20. Mr. Sonola says, the weighted average on the total borrowing as at 31st of March is just over 74, whereas the actual figure per the nominal ledger is just under 73, page 17. Difference of just over 1,500, not adjusted in our nominal ledger. He says, but we do also need to deduce from the two sets of figures in the general scheme of things. In other words, what is the relevance of the information at 5.19? Craig, anything on that?
Thank you, Chair. There are two completely different sets of data. 5.4 is that photograph, it is that snapshot at the 31st of March, whereas 5.19 shows that moving picture over the 365 days and says that our average debt was 74. Because if you were to look at the actual snapshot position at 5.4 is actually decreased from 77.2 to 72.7. So depending on when those maturities were, the actual average over that 365 days was 74 million. So there is no adjustment to nominal ledger figures required. It is just that was the average position and just shows the average return. If I was to just purely show the snapshot position, you wouldn't be able to see what the council had achieved in its overall debt cost or investment interest earned over that year.
Thank you for that one. The final one from Mr. Sonola, 5.33, page 24. The statement's obviously showing our under borrowing position of just over 21,000, which will be monitored at intervals to avert exposing the council to excessive high rates in the future. But when we look at 5.34, 5.35 on page 25, this could be a balancing act in which we might not be able to maintain the policy in 5.33, Mr. Sonola says. while we want to sustain the needs of 5.35, could there be some explanation or some words of wisdom as to what interplay between the two areas will be, and strictly one might have to give way to the other, in essence? Craig, anything on that one?
Okay, they are linked in some way, because obviously our underborough position of 21 mil, it's not 21,000, but 21 million pounds, is something that we do need to monitor. And the table at 5.34 is actually quite useful because I've actually got 3 years worth of data on there. And if I was to use my balance sheet projection and look at where I perceive these investment resources to be over a short timeline, so say 3 to 5 years, I can actually break it down and say, my general fund balances are going to be this, my HRA balances are going to be this, earmark reserves, I can look at historic trends and risks and see where I'm going to use them, capital grants and contributions, so I can actually try and forward forecast where I think investment resources will be. And from that I can actually try and determine what is a reasonable level of underborough position, because obviously what I can't have is that actual investments going to negative, because you can't have negative investments. So while I've actually got resources available to service an internal borrowing position, an underborough position, I will, as long as it doesn't put us at a risk. So there is forward projections using this analysis to actually inform our decision making.
Thank you, Craig. Any other member at this stage? Anything from the external auditors? I'm happy to bring them in if they've got anything they want to add or questions.
I don't think I can add much to that. I can give you my background, but in technical accounting, as to why you account for it, but I don't think that's necessarily needed.
Not a problem. Just always happy to hear. So if there are items, please feel free, gentlemen, along the way. Thank you. So as there are no further members, it's been proposed and seconded to the report be noted. Any dissent to that? No dissent. That is carried. Thank you very much. Item 9 is the Internal Audit Report 2020-2021, and to be presented by Linda. Linda.
Thank you, Chair. This is my annual report, and paragraph 1.1 sets out what I need to include in that report. The first is a statement on conformance with the public sector internal audit standards. So for information, within section 5, I've given a summary of what's included in the standards. And then in section 6 is conformance with the standards. We did have an external assessment completed in 2019, and I brought a copy of the findings of that assessment to the extraordinary meeting of this committee that was held in June. The conclusion of that review was that we did comply with the standards. They did provide some actions and recommendations that would improve and introduce best practice. These have now been addressed. The only two that we didn't agree with was to reduce the number of priority ratings for recommendations and assurance levels, because I felt that reduced the flexibility that we had in giving an opinion. Also required to report the results of the Quality Assurance and Improvement Programme, and that's in section 7. So in 7.1, there are 3 bullet points there. We look at the proportion of planned audits completed in the year, the extent to which management adopt internal audit recommendations, and feedback from managers on the value and performance of the audit, because we issue a client questionnaire on completion of all our audits. We did complete 70% of the plan, which, given the climate last year with COVID-19, that was a fairly good achievement. It was much more difficult to obtain information, people were working from home, and there were COVID-related priorities that were high priorities, and some of our services had to deal with those. So that's the reason why only 70% of the plan was completed. On the client questionnaires, we get generally very good feedback from managers, and they feel that the work that we do adds value to their service. I also need to give an opinion on the overall adequacy and effectiveness of the framework of governance, risk management and control. And based on the opinions that we've given from the 16 operational audits that were completed during the year, and the fact that from the follow-ups, 60 of the 62 recommendations that we checked had either been fully implemented or were in progress, I have been able to give a satisfactory assurance on the adequacy of the framework of governance, risk management and control. In Appendix A and B, there is a summary of the work that supports that opinion. At the end of Appendix A, on pages 46 and 47, following discussions at the extraordinary meeting in June, I've added some additional information to what I would normally put in this report. Table 1 on page 46 gives an overview of how we come to our overall opinion on each of the systems that we've looked at. So when we start an audit, we identify what the risks are, what the key risks are, and then we identify what key controls we would expect to see to mitigate those risks. And then we complete the work, and then we give an opinion on each of the key controls. And then that overview then gives us what our overall opinion should be. So for example, on the benefits one, we identified 5 key controls. We gave a significant opinion on 3 of them, satisfactory on 1 and limited on 1. So our overall opinion was satisfactory. On table 2, this is just the number of recommendations that we've made on each of the 16 areas that we've looked at and the priority rating that was given to each one. It is difficult to correlate that information to the overall opinion because, again, for benefits, we gave 6 recommendations, but they were around just 2 of the key control areas because 3 of them were significant, so we would have made no recommendations. And I think that's all I'd like to say. If there's any questions, Chair.
Thank you very much for that, Linda. So there are 3 recommendations printed at 2.1, 2.2, 2.3. Those are A, to note the findings of the assessment of the internal audit function against the public sector internal audit standards and quality assurance programme. B, to consider the summary of internal audit work at Appendix A and B, which supports the Head of Audit and Governance's opinion. And C, that the Head of Audit and Governance overall opinion on the controlled environment be noted. So for the purposes of debate, I will move. Is there a seconder for that? Councillor Downs, thank you. Any member wish to speak on this item? Councillor Condacor.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of points from Appendix A. I actually raised this first one at scrutiny. The data quality for planning applications. We have planning applications that sometimes never get determined. We've got one in Wellington at the moment for the railway embankment, and we've got Top Farm that's not been determined for almost 4 years now. I'm really concerned that we're showing this number of days to get a planning application done, and we've got some that are never done, and I don't know where these infinite numbers and non-completeds actually fall, because the data quality seems really poor. We only seem to measure the planning applications that go through without a hold-up. So that's my first point. Second, fire risk assessments. I'm concerned that we've got limited assurance for our corporate buildings, but I'm actually surprised that it's actually satisfactory for our housing sites. I actually asked for the risk assessments for Wellington housing sites, and they haven't yet been finalised, even though it's about 5 years now after Grenfell. So it'd be useful to get some idea about assurance of the housing sites for our fire risk management. And finally, on pollution control, we really haven't done anything for our 2011 action plan on that. So I note that you've given it satisfactory assurance, even though we don't seem to be making much progress. And the bit about it's positive that we're not taking Leicester Road Gyratory out was actually a member's decision. It was actually the members of the Environment Scrutiny Committee. actually voted that we needed to keep monitoring Leicester Road gyratory rather than an officer decision. So if Linda could comment on those 3 areas. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Linda.
Yeah, in relation to the fire risk assessments, what our housing department have done is actually brought in an external company to complete the fire risk assessments across all of our housing properties and general purpose flats, and they are in the process of completing those now. That started in, I believe, December of last year. The work that we actually do internally is just around our corporate buildings, and it was our corporate sites where we felt that there was more failings than rather than housing sites because of the work that the external company were doing. On the planning applications, I take your point, but without the statistics in front of me, it's very difficult for me to comment on those. But I'm quite happy to go forward and look at those and give you some further feedback. On the Leicester Road gyratory air quality management area, yeah, it could have been members, but the fact that it is still positive to note that it's still being monitored, even though the results show that it is an area that we can reduce the monitoring in that area. And I think that was mainly because of the substantial growth in house building in that side of the town. But it is still a positive note, I believe.
Thank you, Linda. Yeah, just before I bring Councillor Condacall back, as I've said before, the elements of this is, then the process, this particularly, hopefully this will be helpful to new members, is that whilst Linda and her team carry out those audits, it is in the responsibility of the managers of those relevant departments to pick up on the findings and actually implement those or not do so. And I've made it very clear before as chair, very happy to accommodate if there are certain departments that we have particular concerns on, to request those, if committee so wishes, to actually come and to actually answer some of these questions themselves if we are particularly concerned about them. I know Linda is very helpful with her responses, but in that kind of sense she is, for want of a better phrase, the middle person in that element. So if there are burning questions, and particularly, for example, I draw attention to committee's page 43 on data quality, where nearly a third of the issues, for example, a third of our data is wrong when it's gone out. If there are specific concerns like those, I'm very happy to have the relevant heads of department or senior managers at those particular element levels in front of us to answer those questions directly. So whilst absolutely put questions away to Linda now, if people are so minded, very happy to consider that as well. So let's note, hopefully they'll be helpful, particularly to new members. Councillor Condacall, I think you had a follow-up.
Yes, please, Chair. It's on the data quality, also the fire risk assessment, and you did say burning issue, Chair, which I thought was very clever. It was actually December 2019 that the actual external consultants came in, so it's about 20 months ago. So I do think the housing department says, well, we've got external contractors. I think it would be good to have some reassurance that those things are being closed down, rather than just say, well, it's ongoing, because fire risk is so important. So maybe if we could in some way just cross-check or have an end date to it, because at the moment it's with external contractors. And in terms of assurance, I think the fire safety stuff is the one thing we really need to double-check and triple-check, that actually we have a plan in place. Chairs.
Thank you, Linda. Any comments or thoughts on that particular point?
Yeah, with the external contractors, yes, we were quite happy that they were carrying out assessments, they were producing reports, they were producing action plans, and those actions were being monitored by the Fire Risk Management Group. So that we were comfortable with the process that was being followed. whereas with the corporate sites, there were gaps, that some assessments had been done, reports hadn't been issued, so there was no action plan in place to address the issues that had been found, and that's why we gave different opinions on between housing and corporate.
Thank you very much, Chair. I mean, in terms of the specific outcome of all the various reviews, that may be something Councillor Condacall wants to raise with the OSP. For example, that might be an avenue for him in terms of looking at content of reports, for example. You know, he's aware of the council and procedures, and obviously I'm sure they would be very happy to receive those sorts of requests. Councillor Tromans.
Thank you, Chair. I think there's a couple of areas that this report tells me are concerning. And to give everybody background, I know in previous meetings, Linda, when we've spoken, you've explained, you know, there's an awful lot of experience in your team and a lot of experience of Nuneaton and Bedworth Borough Council, and so, you know, you guys know what should be going on, what should be done, what the appropriate things are, how things should happen in departments, and can audit that appropriately, and that's a real strength. And so my first area of concern is around the fact that this council's been going rather a long time. It doesn't do anything that's wildly new. The buildings are all pretty much the same. You know, departments are much the same. Things, you know, carry on. It all ought to be a well-trodden path. It ought to be tried and tested. Things should always be giving, you know, kind of, you know, significant assurance. You know, what could go wrong if you've been doing something for 47 years? You know, how come it's not being done right after all that period of time? I know that's to oversimplify, and some things change, and obviously personnel change and whatever. But the fact is, you know, out of the 17 reviews that were done, only one was a significant outcome. And I know this is all retrospective. This isn't how the council is as of this day, today. This is all looking back, some of it over a year and more. But it speaks to me of an organisation that's, you know, either, you know, under pressure or underperforming. And under pressure would typically be a series of, you know, large-scale mistakes, gaffes and whatever that trigger root cause analysis, deep dives, audit going in there, checking what had happened. There doesn't seem to be too much of that. There just seems to be almost going round, and every few years we're back to the same department who now have not learnt the lessons from last time, and if they did improve in response to your action point have gone back down. And the fact that there's limited assurances coming out of such a, you know, a fixed thing like a local authority which is doing the same stuff month in, month out, year in, year out, is rather worrying. And I think the public and newer members particularly are going to question why it is that we're getting limited assurances at all, and that, you know, there's only one significant assurance. It's all just about satisfactory or with a whole bunch of recommendations in there. And as part of that point, there's also, you mentioned recommendations, a lot of them have been followed up. They all seem to have been followed up, and some of them seem to have been actioned, but an awful lot are still in progress months, year or more after. And it's what was wrong with the department that's been around for years, that it got a low rating. There was a large action plan. It's only adopted a couple of those recommendations so far, and the rest is still months and a year or whatever down the line not been adopted. What's happening there? What's the mechanism for addressing that? Or is the mechanism you coming here, telling us, and us getting the political leadership to have a shake-up? So that's the first area of concern that I want to raise, and give you an opportunity to address that and give your thoughts on that, please.
Yeah, happy to come back. So it's quite a complex point. Linda, is there anything at this stage do you want to come back on that? Yeah, no problem. Linda, please.
I take your point, Councillor Tromans, but I did do some benchmarking probably about 18 months ago, and the results that we're finding between the different levels of assurance are very similar across all authorities. So I don't think we're any different. We're not any worse than any other authority. From a management point of view, I don't know why it's not significant in every area. you know, we come in, we do our audit work, and we form an opinion, and I'll explain tonight how we get to that opinion. But we're no different, I don't think, to other authorities from the benchmarking work that I've done previously.
Thank you. Is there another point, Councillor Twymans?
Councillor Twymans. I think on that, Chair, it would be great if Linda could share that benchmarking work so that we can put the performance of the council in context. And I think if there is anything more up to date than that you've got, that would be better still, so that we can look at what you looked at and we can see what the very latest is. And then, you know, that puts it in context, and it's an answer for the public who might be wondering why, after all this time, stuff still needs a lot of improvement. The other bit...
Sorry, just before you go on, I see a nod of the head from Linda there. I've just asked, Craig's just asked if he can come in on the point you've just made before we move to the next one, please, if that's all right. Craig, please.
Thank you very much. Councillor Tremors, I think what would be worth saying as well is the definitions of significant and satisfactory, and it would be great if we could get everything as significant assurance, but sometimes it's a cost-benefit analysis. But if the definition of satisfactory says basically a sound system of internal control with some minor weaknesses, and if to get to significant could potentially be costly, resource intensive, so it's striking a reasonableness balance of saying yes, satisfactory is not, it's not playing it down, it is a sound control but with some minor weaknesses, so it's probably being mindful as to how much investment we do want to put in these.
Councillor Tromans.
Thank you. I think that's a very good point, well made, Craig, and actually that would account for some of it. However, we would expect to see more than just one get the higher rating. And the other thing is the three that got the low ratings, lower than that, were fire risk, the building that we're in, you know, could all burn down or whatever, some fairly serious stuff, and also equality in terms of treating our staff fairly and all the rest of it, which is somewhat worrying, and data quality. This is the stuff, how can we possibly function and perform well if we can't rely on our data? I mean, there is, for those of us that are old enough, that data processing adage, which is garbage in, garbage out. If you don't collect good data, how can you possibly understand how well you're doing? So I do take your points, but in the context of this report, there's still, I think, more to be asked. The other point I wanted to make that out of the two, Linda, is that in terms of the controls that we've got here, and I'm glad you mentioned benchmarking, because the quality assurance is pretty much that, you know, you do some QA on the work that your guys do. Before any of those files go out to people, you give them the once over, and so there is an internal quality assessment there by you. And then we rely on the feedback from the managers, which is great. It's nice to know it's helpful. If it was that helpful, then they wouldn't keep on getting, you know, the lower rating or medium rating stuff, one could argue. But it's, what about externally? What are we doing to get feedback on the control levels that we have and the QA stuff that you do and that others do? Is there more QA we should be doing to be competitive with other local authorities? Is there some external benchmarking of QA that we can get done? If you could give us some comments on that, that'd be great.
Thank you, Councillor Jones. Just before I bring Linda in, just a point. Actually, I think you raised a point on equality there, and about actually our internal staff and how we treat them. I think it's important, and a good point to note at the moment was that at full council last week it did adopt our recommendation from this committee of an employment committee, and that actually some of these policies at our authority have not been reviewed since the early 2000s. In fact, I think Councillor Evans pointed out that he was 4 years old at the time when some of these employment practices were last reviewed. Clearly not acceptable. And I think it's important to note at this point that our recommendation of an employment committee, and that is one of the roles which they will carry out, amongst others, as colleagues will be aware, that actually was approved by council and has now been duly established and will get on with its work. So I think just a good point to highlight that as not only an important factor for our employees to make sure that their practices and codes and etc. are up to date, but also an important thing to point out that something this committee put through its extraordinary meeting is now already in place approximately a month after. So just on that, to cover that element that Councillor Troman's made. Linda, have you got anything on the other substantive points from Councillor Troman's? Yeah, Linda, please. Thank you.
Yeah, just on the quality assurance, the only other external quality assurance that we're required to have is the quality assessment review at least once every 5 years. It's a requirement of the standards, and the last one, as I said earlier, was completed in 2019, and they go through all the standards that are included in section 5 of this report and make sure that we're actually complying with those, and report on what their findings are. And the report in 2019 was that we are compliant with the standards. So that's an assessment of the procedure. We do have an audit manual that sets out the procedures that the team have to follow, and that was included as part of that assessment.
Thank you very much for those answers there, Linda. Councillor Kenner.
Thank you, Jay. Just remind me of something then. While Councillor Evans was 4 years old, I was only 5 when some of the last policies were reviewed, and now I'm on audit and standards. I'm just wondering, is there any way, actually before I do, because I'm a relatively new member of audit and standards, under the 2020-21 audit plan starts with asbestos management on page 42. Is that a new document? Has that just been published for our benefit today, or is that something that's been known about within the council for a little while now? That's just my first point. And if so, or if not, is there any way we could find out what actions either have been taken or are planned to be taken from this audit plan, from the issues raised? Like, there's a couple of quite concerning ones. Obviously, data quality has been mentioned quite a few times tonight, but also in asbestos management, not all incidents being logged. Is there any way for us to know what is being done or what has been done from an audit and standards point of view, rather than outside in OSPs? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kenner. Anything, Linda?
Yeah, the results that are presented tonight are a picture of the situation at the time that we actually did the audit. So things may well have progressed and things may have changed, but I'm just the messenger providing you with the results. It's difficult for me to tell you how things have changed since we did the audit. But if there are any particular areas that you do have concern, we can always either bring a further report from the manager at the next meeting, or you can invite one of the managers along to give you a verbal update if there are any areas of particular concern.
Councillor Kenner, is there a specific request? Would you like some sort of written update, or for a relevant manager to come in front of us? I'm very happy for any member that wants to hear those to certainly try and facilitate where we can, bearing in mind obviously time of various departments, not the time of this committee at the moment with a full agenda, but very happy to hear, Councillor Kenner, if there is a suggestion from him that he has in mind.
Thank you, Chair. And if I'm able to make more than one suggestion, I'd be grateful. In particular, I'll be looking at hearing from anyone in charge of data quality, just because I think those issues are quite significant there and quite worrying for me, and as well in fire risk management, to see what's been done there. Do I have to propose that, or is that taken away from here?
Well, I think before we go to that, I know from our pre-meet there were some points about data quality, because obviously the thing with those points, for example, as we can see on page 43, is whilst they're a data quality, they are for separate departments there in that respect. So it would technically be, rather than a data quality, it technically would be for departmental managers that we would need to invite. However, I know on those specific areas, some work has been done on those areas that may not actually now, or may reduce the concern of members on those elements. I don't know if, Linda, you want me to stretch those, or you want to lay those out? I'll let Linda explain those elements before we look at perhaps areas, because I think it's important that where we have some of these things that, as I say, this is a snapshot at that point in time, where we have some updates, some of those concerns. So for me, the bottom two aren't necessarily there anymore because of measures that have come in since this. So Linda, if I can just on those, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, of the 4 that we identified issues with that are listed on page 43, I know that the safeguarding spreadsheet has been updated, so there is no chance of any double counting in the future, so I know that area has been addressed. But the data quality in general is an area that does concern me. We do have quite high error rates. It's an area that we look at every year for that reason. But we are working with senior managers at the moment to look at the number of indicators that are actually being published to make sure that they're the areas that our residents and members of the public are actually interested in, because the more indicators we publish, the more work is involved in making sure that that information is correct. And if we publish something, it's got to be correct. So I am generally responsible for performance management corporately, so we are working with senior managers and looking at what's on the system. Because if we can reduce it to fewer and get those spot on and right, then that is far better than what we've got at the moment.
Thank you, Linda. Yeah, so I think kind of hopefully that answers some of them. I don't know whether, I know one of the big concerns at the moment generally is the grounds maintenance area. And I don't know, obviously, with those, that is more of a policy area as quoted on page 43 rather than perhaps the way in which we're doing that. Would it be that, Councillor Kenner, on this point you'd be asking for a relevant relevant officer to come in future on that specific point of PUL PI 21A? Is that sort of your request now? I think the others have been relatively answered.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, the others have been answered, and I appreciate that. Yeah, if that's possible, to get relevant individual in to answer concerns about grounds maintenance data, that'd be handy, specifically in relation to this.
Happy to accept that as a friendly amendment, so that's come forward in, say, September. Is there any dissent at this point to that becoming a friendly? Councillor Condacourse.
Chair, could we also at the same time ask about the fire thing, because that might be useful. They might hopefully have their consultants got to a useful point to give us some confidence that that's been progressed. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we said at the time that we would ask for a written note in the first instance on the fire element. I think that was what we said at that point, and I saw Linda at that point nodding away. Are we happy to be able to get that, Linda, in respect to the fire element? Given that it's, by and large, it's the work of external people, I think it might be more helpful to go down that route, because that then will allow information to come back, and we can have hopefully something in writing from the external contractors as part of that briefing note to us. Whereas I'm not sure we necessarily get them in front of the committee. So let's go for that in the interim on that particular element, and we can hopefully get some of their own words. But if there are still concerns, Councillor Condacourse, at that point, very happy for that to come forward again. You know, very happy for this committee to be very open and call people as it needs, as we see fit. So hopefully that covers that element as well with him. I've got a thumbs up from Councillor Condacourse. So thank you, Councillor Kenner. Was that all in terms of comments, questions? Thank you very much. Next speaker, I have Councillor Beetham. Councillor Beetham.
Hi, thank you. So Councillor Kenner has more or less covered my points in regards to the data quality, and I too would have asked in regards to the grounds maintenance. So my only question would be in regards to the benefits audit, which was satisfactory. I just wanted to know, where it said there were significant delays, do you know what the rough time frame for significant is in regards to that? That's all my question. If it helps, it's page 43.
Thank you very much for that, Councillor Beetham. Just give us all a second to get there. Thank you. Linda.
unfortunately, I'm not able to answer your question tonight, but I'm more than happy to get more information and maybe email it to members of the committee, if that's okay.
Yeah, certainly very happy with that on those technical elements. Councillor Beetham, you happy with that as well? Excellent, thank you very much. That is, any other member wish to speak on this item? No. So what we have got, and another point I would just sort of make is in respect of equality, which I know was something raised by Councillor Tromans earlier. Very happy, whilst it's not something obviously we will be dealing with these renewals, very happy for us to make comment to, or indeed write to, if the committee wishes, on behalf to the chair of the employment committee, if there are specific elements that we have there. I'm happy to open the floor if there are, if that is a request, or whether I've misinterpreted that request. Councillor Tromans.
I think we could, we raised the points. Linda's, kind of noted them all. I think that the main things that we were going to have were things shared with us about benchmarking on both of the points that I raised. So, yeah, we're good. Other than that, I think.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Tromans. Yeah, as I say, those have already been accepted. It was just a, whilst we were on the subject of adding anything, if there was anything else specifically at that stage. So that's a no. So we have obviously the recommendations set out in 2.1, 2.2 and 2.3. And obviously we've got a sort of a 2.4, as it were, which is to ask the head of the service in respect to grounds maintenance to the September meeting for, in specifically relation to the data quality element on page 43 in respect of PULPI 21A. So that obviously has been added with consent of the meeting. So it has been proposed and seconded. Is there any dissent to those four items as moved? That's no dissent. That therefore is carried. Thank you very much for that particular item, Linda, and thank you everyone for their contributions. Now move on to agenda item 10, which is the internal audit plan, again to be presented to us by Linda. So Linda, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. At the extraordinary meeting of this committee in June, there was a request that internal audit carry out some additional audit work that was unplanned, and there are 6 areas, and those are listed in paragraph 4.1 of the report. Given that additional work and the resources available, it's very unlikely that we'll be able to complete the approved plan that Audit and Standards approved in March of this year and carry out this additional work. So what this report is proposing is some changes to the approved plan. So at Appendix A on page 54, that's the plan that was approved by Audit and Standards in March. The areas that are in italics, they're the audits that have either been completed or in progress. So I'm proposing that those that are in progress, we continue with those and complete them. Those marked with an asterisk are those that were brought forward from the 2021 plan, because they were the areas, because of COVID and the effect that it had on some of our services, they were the areas that we found it difficult to audit. So what I propose is that those audits be completed, because they've already been deferred once, don't want to defer them again. So those items that I've highlighted in bold are the new areas that we've added this year into the plan. And what I'm proposing at the moment is that we don't defer those at the moment, but if there is a need to defer any audits, then it is the items in bold that we will defer. We do have a risk assessment process, and each of these areas will have a risk score, so we can use that to prioritise those that will be deferred, so that we do look at the higher risk areas earlier rather than later. So it's just whether committee members are happy with that approach.
Thank you, Linda. So yeah, just to summarise effectively, those in bold are the ones we will have to take a view of later. I have asked, as chair on our behalf, to be kept updated, and that we've absolutely agreed to that. And obviously, when we do have to make a decision on, as we get through the year and say, actually, no, we aren't going to, when we know where we are with capacity, how long other audits have taken, that will then come back to ANS to then take a view of these particular items and what we might want to potentially defer to next year, or what we may decide at that time. Probably envisage that being at least December, possibly January, when that comes back to us. Though assured that in the interim I'll be keeping a rolling brief, and Linda and I will be in discussions about that. So the recommendation is at 2.1 that the proposed changes to the plan at A be approved. To allow debate, I will move that. Is there a seconder? Councillor Downs, thank you very much. Any member wish to speak or comment on this item? Councillor Beetham.
Hi, may I just ask what the VFM reviews stand for?
Yeah, they're value for money reviews. It was our head of finance that just wanted us to put some time aside for value for money reviews. So if there was an area that there was particular concern, then there was a resource that Simone could bring in to carry out a value for money review.
Thank you. Councillor Tromans.
Thank you, Chair. I think there is one item on there in bold that I'm a bit worried about. Anything to do with health and safety, and the fire risk management. Hopefully, we've addressed that, and we're going to get a response from the items we've talked about before. But I think if there is anything that you would want to put to the back of the list, it's probably street naming and numbering. So maybe one of those in bold could be removed, and street naming and numbering could be substituted for it. That's partly because I understand we are going to be a bit more proactive from the portfolio holder, what they've said, a bit more proactive in terms of suggestions to developers for street naming, so that local things can be recognised rather than just having to recycle the same things that are in street names that are in every town that's got new development. So I think it might make sense to defer that one almost anyway, just to see how things pan out with the new plans the portfolio holders got, and look at it in a couple of years' time or 3 years' time, and then draw some conclusions on that. So yeah, to me that one's definitely not a priority, and stuff that's health and safety should definitely be done in front of that. So if you want to swap those two, that would be great.
Thank you, Councillor Jones. Just on that point, a reminder to members, those in italics, which is street naming, numbering are, they have already begun. The audit has already begun. So it wouldn't be necessarily possible to defer that. Just also on the health and safety element, you'll also see that it says excluding the asbestos management and fire risk management, on the basis they've just had that audit. Whilst there will be follow-up works, obviously they won't be auditing those particular sections again. Though I take your broader point about the broader health and safety element. Given that new information, Councillor Tromans, did you want to come back? Councillor Tromans.
I take your point about that. As I said, we've reached the conclusion that we wanted to on the fire risk and everything anyway in the earlier point. But it's the other health and safety stuff I was a little bit worried about. Sorry, on my printing, it doesn't look like it's in any different typeface to me. So, but that could just be my glasses. Street naming and numbering just looks like it's in ordinary typeface on my copy. So that's why I raised it. If that's already virtually finished, then I guess there's nothing you can do. But if it's just being started, then maybe deferring that. I'll leave that we'll just leave that for the officer's best endeavours, I think, rather than make a formal change.
Thank you, Councillor Tromans. Was anything, Linda, or yeah?
Yeah, the street naming and numbering, that audit's actually completed and the report's been issued. On health and safety, I do take your point. We've already looked at the high risk areas of asbestos management and fire risk management. But health and safety is going through a restructure at the moment, so roles and responsibilities are changing. And although it is higher risk than street naming and numbering, that's why we haven't looked at it yet, because we need to make sure that the new structure is embedded before we actually go and look at it.
Thank you, Linda. As I say, the bold tonight is effectively a heads up that this is the likely things that we might look to drop. Nothing is, as I understand, set in stone. As I say, Linda and I will be having regular discussions on that, and obviously it will come back to committee for any change at the relevant point. So it's more of a heads up, but certainly take those points, and it might be something when we get close to that time, we perhaps have more of an in-depth area of, specifically within those areas, what are the particular key points, what are the risk scores, etc. at that point. So hopefully that will assure Councillor Tromans, and no doubt when it comes back to us effectively, when we've got a more concrete idea of, no way are we getting through X, Y and Z, we can certainly look at those points there. But thank you, Councillor Tromans. Councillor Condacor.
Thank you, Chair. Given the limitations on resources, I wonder it might be wise on 4.1 to limit some of these reviews so they're all 2 years, because obviously the most valuable information is what's happened in the last couple of years. And if you go back 10 years, the community centre or the compensation claim, the entire people involved may be totally different. And I think if we find something in looking back over 2 years that causes us to look back over 10, A, that's worrying, but B, that could be a second phase. So I think in terms of trying to get some of these other reviews going on, it might be worth making all the items that were said 10 years in 4.1, 2 years like the other ones. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Condacor. As mover at this time, I don't agree. So, but however, if he wants to formally move that as an amendment, obviously he's within his rights and following a second. I am happy. So I'm not willing to accept that as a friendly amendment. But if he does wish to test the temperature of the committee, I'm very happy for him now to move that as a formal proposal and see if there's a second. Entirely up to yourself, Councillor Condacor. Councillor Condacor.
Chair, I will so move that we amend 4.1 to say 2 years in the items that say 10. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Is there a seconder? No, that's not seconded, so that that motion falls. I haven't got any more councillors on my list. Any further speakers on this item? Oh, sorry, Councillor Rudkin. Apologies.
Sorry, I've only just raised my hand. Just a quick question for Craig, really. Is Craig happy to leave the value for money reviews? Are you quite happy with that? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Rudkin. Craig.
The original request was from Simone. However, I think at the present time, getting these other priorities are priority investor, and there's going to be a lot of value for money work done as part of the external audit as well.
Thank you, Craig. Any other member? Anything from our external auditors, since they're still here? Anything you want to add? Nothing? No? Perfect. Thank you very much. So it's been proposed and seconded that the changes to the internal audit plan as Appendix B be approved. Is there any dissent? There is. Given there's dissent, then I will take a full vote. Those in favour, or was that a request for a further speech, Councillor Conover? To dissent. Thank you very much. Given there is dissent, we'll go to a full vote. All those in favour of the recommendation, i.e. that the Appendix A be approved. All those in favour? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 10 members. Those against? Thank you. That's Councillor Condacor with a request to record his vote. That motion is carried 10-1. Thank you very much. Agenda item 11, we come to now the Internal Audit Charter. That will be presented by Linda Downs. Just a note, and I think Linda will probably cover this. The document was, when submitted, had track changes in it, the charter. Unfortunately, for some reason, those haven't carried across. Just to draw to members' attention that the 3 changes are listed at bullet points on page 56. Just to bring your attention to that now. And I'm sure, Linda will probably reference that as well, but just to bring members' early attention so they can sort of match up and marry up the documents. Linda, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, this is an updated internal audit charter. Paragraphs 4.1 and 4.2 set out what the charter needs to include, because having a charter is a requirement of the public sector internal audit standards. The first charter was drafted in 2013 when the standards were first introduced, and it's been updated on several occasions since then. I've carried out a review and there are very few changes that are actually needed as a result of that review, but they're included in the 3 bullet points on page 56. The first one is, I've just, in paragraph 10.2, I've just added a sentence in there because now any reports with limited assurance are submitted to management team for consideration, ensuring that any appropriate action is being taken. So that's been added in. And then there's been changes in section 11 and section 12. We do work very closely with Grant Thornton, but going back historically, we used to have what was called a managed audit approach, which meant that any work that internal audit did within the financial areas, our external auditors were able to look at that and place reliance on that work. But the standards that our external auditors now work to means that they have to do the work anyway. So although we work very closely with them, we can't coordinate plans like we used to anymore. So I've made changes in sections 11 and 12 to reflect that. So apologies for track changes disappearing, but there were very few that were needed anyway. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Linda. Given the external audit's been named, anything you guys wanted to add at this time? One second, just while we turn a mic. Thanks.
Yeah, Chair, just to reiterate, it's not that we don't work with internal audit. The standards have changed in terms of I'm not permitted to direct them to undertake work on my behalf. And because we have to undertake it to a certain level of standard, because I can't direct Linda, it's in the UK, I think actually abroad you can do that, but in the UK you can't, therefore I can't place direct reliance upon their work. So it's not saying we don't work to each other. I do review their work, and of course actually I suppose under the council audit regulations, yourself as a council have a responsibility to have a proper internal audit in place, so it's part of that 5-yearly review and elements like that. So just to say we do cooperate with them, it's just that I can't specifically ask Linda to do work for me, and therefore I think that's why those lines have been taken out.
Thank you, Grant, for that. I think it's a helpful addition, and always welcome any comments from our external auditors as we go along. So the recommendation is at 2.1 that the internal audit charter at Appendix A be approved. Happy to propose that. Anybody to second? Councillor Condacor, thank you very much. Any member wishing to speak on this item? No. In which case it has been proposed and seconded that the internal audit charter at Appendix A be approved. Is there any dissent? No, there is no dissent, so that is approved. Thank you very much. Agenda. So that concludes that item. On to agenda item 12. Any other items? There was a request from Councillor Downs who wanted to bring something to the committee's attention. Councillor Downs.
Thank you, Chair. I've only just been recently elected, and as a lot of my colleagues in May, when we signed the book of office and everything else, and we're all having a cheer, there was no DBS form to fill in, which I found quite surprising and shocking, to be honest with you guys. When I got elected on the Thursday night, on the Saturday morning, I was called to a young family's residence with 2 very young children who had a housing emergency. I could have been anybody. It is not something that I'm happy to go along with. We need to have the DBS checks. I believe that not the councillors ourselves, we need to be protected. But the general public, the elderly, the infirm, young families, anybody. So what I've asked the chair for tonight is, if I don't know, I need to propose it or something like that, but whether the council can look into all councillors being DBS checked, please. I know for my own sake, it'd be, you know, a little safeguarding really for the general public. I know myself and the Chair have spoke about this and he totally agrees, so over to you, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dance. If you could just bear me one moment, I'm just going to just seek. Councillor Kenny, if you've got just something to add, if you want to do that, and at the same time, I'll just quickly confer. Thank you.
Councillor Downs, I know a number of councils actually already do this. I think off the top of my head, Buckinghamshire County Council is one. So I know there are mechanisms in place for this to happen, and I think it is probably a fairly good idea to take DBS checks, because as you say, we can help residents who may be extremely vulnerable, and we need to make sure that top quality people are helping out residents in Nuneaton Bedworth.
Thank you, Councillor Kenner. I do know that it was something I specifically asked for if I could have been as an individual in 2018, and was told that that wasn't possible through the council. But I have had it indicated that Linda may be able to provide some sort of explanation that perhaps we can then look from there. Linda, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not saying that I agree with the legislation, and I hear what you're saying, but it's all linked around the Rehabilitation of Offenders Act, and we can only carry out DBS checks when you're undertaking what's classed as regulated activity, and just coming into contact with families and children isn't classed as regulated activity. So if we were to carry out a DBS check for all elected members, we'd actually be in breach of the legislation. I'm not saying I agree with it, but that is the new legislation.
Linda, on that point, if it were would there therefore be a difference between a blanket approach and an individual member approaching and asking? Because effectively one is mandated, the other would be a request and therefore would have complete consent. Would there potentially be a potential to look at something there? Or is this a hard no, there is absolutely no way we can do that? If you know, sorry if you put you on the spot.
No, to carry out a full DBS check, consent doesn't come into it. You have to comply with the legislation. What you could carry out is a basic DBS check, but the feedback that you get from those is, as it says, very basic. But you can carry out a basic DBS check, but not a full check, which would give you all the information that you need to give you the assurance that you're looking for.
Thank you, Linda. I guess the question would be basic versus none. I guess it's probably a slight difference there. Councillor Beetham, you indicated.
So my question was basically just about what is the main differences, what information do you get with a basic, and what information would you get with a full?
Sorry, these are quite technical. I understand if, Linda, you might not have the answers at this moment in time, but if you do have anything, appreciated. If not, that's no issue as well.
No, I haven't got the information to hand to answer your question this evening, but again, as in previously, I'm more than happy to get the definitions and give you the information and email members of this committee with that information to enable you to make a informed decision.
Thank you, Linda. Councillor Downs, would that satisfy you at the moment if we had something, and then we could potentially look at further discussions or where and if this could be referred elsewhere? It may be something for a Constitutional Review Working Party, it could be something for us. I couldn't say at this very moment in time, but would that satisfy you, a difference between a basic and I think it's enhanced, isn't it? I think the terminology is, and whether actually that would satisfy us or not, and we can then have an informed discussion. Would that commitment satisfy you, Councillor Downs?
Yes, Chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and thank you to Linda for asking that. The final item just that I wanted to raise is I'd had a couple of queries from councillors in respect of the way in which hearing panels work. A reminder that there is standards element training next Thursday, a week on Thursday, apologies, rather than a week, so 9 so days from now. But so that would be very important to attend. But in essence, there would obviously be the complaint put forward by the council's solicitors, a response from the individual who's been complained against, potentially big back and forth and questions. The panel would ask its questions. The panel would comprise of 3 members as a subcommittee of this panel, and there would be an independent person that would sit there as well. Following all from that, you would go outside, all the other parties would go outside, leaving just the panel, the independent person, and the council's advisor to the committee. And that person is there to advise the committee if they are asked, and is there for example, if panel wanted to ask, well, you know, what sanctions could we impose if we wish to? They're not there to make a case for either effectively the council who are pursuing the complaint or the defendant who is obviously defending against the complaint. Panel would come to its decision if required. There would be a vote. The members, as with all votes of committees, the members of that panel, the 3 elected members, would have the vote. Obviously, the independent person is free to voice their comments, ask questions in the same way you are, but does not get a vote on that item. And then that obviously would then, if found the complaint was upheld, obviously the panel would decide what sanctions may be required from those prescribed in statute, and obviously they may decide not to uphold a complaint as well. So that is a very whistle-stop tour. I know it had been asked, but that will obviously be covered in that particular training session. I can see the council legal advisor nodding away, and I'm sure if he will add as much more detail and just make sure everybody understands that at that session, or whoever runs that session, I should say, on Thursday week. So that's just to cover that. I think the biggest question was about independent person and what their role is, and also about the legal advisor, which is also a member of the council's legal team, and what their role is or isn't, and whether, you know, what extent they should have. Again, so that is very much they are there to advise on points of law, not to put forward points of view on whether something should be upheld or rejected. So hopefully that clears that up, and we'll be able to go into a bit more detail later on. Councillor Beetham, I see you indicating was there something with respect of that? Councillor Beetham.
So just in regards to the hearing panels, you said they're usually made up of 3 people. I was having a look in Constitution. I couldn't see where it says there needs to be 3 people, but there needs to be a quorum of 3. But it doesn't say it's mandated at 3 in total. I wondered if I've missed somewhere in the Constitution, or whether that decision's been made somewhere else.
Philip Richardson.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, the procedure really should say that the quorum is 3 and the panel is 3. We can't have a panel of 2 because whoever is chairing it is effectively making the decision, so it has to be 3. So what we will have to do is look at the wording in the procedure guide, because I think it's actually incorrect.
Thank you, Philip. Does that placate you, Councillor Beetham, or did you want to look at this in more detail, either on our own or a subcommittee to look at the procedure or anything like that, or are you happy at this stage? Councillor Beetham.
If this could be looked into either in subcommittee or as part of the Constitutional Working Party, or whatever's best for that, whatever way the council sees fit to go forward, that'd be appreciated.
Thank you very much, Councillor Beetham. As it happens, a couple of points of suggestion for Constitutional Review Working Party were actually drawn up the other day, and I believe that are being handled by Philip. He has heard that, and I will ask that be a point that the committee, Constitutional Review Working Party, whether or not they wish to consider that, that'd be a suggestion put to them. Obviously, it's up to them to decide their own agendas, but we have put forward a couple of suggestions from ANS, and I will ask that that one be included with those other, I think, 4 or 5 items. Thank you. If there's no further members, not on this item, thank you very much. In which case, that comes to the conclusion of our meeting this evening. Can I thank members for their attendance? And can I also thank, obviously, our external auditors for their presence as well, and for staying and contributing to other items. So with that, declare the meeting closed, and can I ask that the live stream please be stopped? We'll remain seated until I've got confirmation from that effect. Thank you.